In this video, we'll discuss the psychology of eating. Eating behavior is actually a huge area of research for social and health psychologists. If you think about it, eating is something you do several times a day. It's crucial for sustaining life. Food choices can influence your health, and eating can be a source of pleasure. So if you think about it, there are few activities as crucial and important as eating. We're going to focus on three main questions concerning eating. 1. How do people decide which foods to eat? 2. How do people decide how much food to eat? And 3. What are the psychological effects of hunger or starvation? There are three main types of models that are used to study people's food choices. These are developmental models, cognitive models, and psychophysiological models. Developmental models emphasize the importance of learning and experience and focus on the development of food preferences in childhood. Early researchers looked at the food preferences of infants and young children. They found that children were able to choose foods and consume amounts of food that were consistent with their growth and health. However, these children didn't get to choose whatever foods they wanted. Instead, they were provided with multiple healthy options. The best thing for parents to do to encourage healthy eating in their kids is to decide what foods to make available, when meals will be, and where meals will take place. Kids can then decide whether to eat the options and how much of the options they choose to eat. This ensures that parents won't turn certain foods into rewards and other foods into punishments. This system allows kids to learn how to regulate their eating in a healthy manner. This system also includes not removing foods from your menu just because your kids don't like them. Most people, both adults and kids, tend not to like foods the first time they try them, except for those foods that are high in fat and sugar. So you need to try a food several times before you come to like it. The only way to ensure that your kid won't like a food is to remove it from your food rotation based on their initial opinion of it. According to developmental models, we develop our food preferences through multiple exposures, social learning, and associative learning. Multiple exposures, about 8 or 10, are necessary to help kids like new foods. This is why parents shouldn't remove any kind of food from a menu after just one try. Social learning plays a role, and it should be no surprise that kids can form their preferences through social learning. Kids are great at mimicking. Kids are influenced through their peers' eating behavior, their parents' eating behavior, and the media. So think of commercials for cereal brands during Saturday morning cartoons. Associative learning involves introducing rewards and punishments into food choices. This is not an ideal way to form children's food choices, but it is effective. If a food is used as a reward, such as getting a cookie after picking up the kid's toys, then the preference for that food will increase. Another common example is when a parent says, "You can only have ice cream if you finish your vegetables." That's a great way to increase the preference for ice cream while diminishing the preference for vegetables. Vegetables are then seen as a food that really must taste terrible if the kid can only get ice cream for finishing them. Cognitive models focus on the extent to which cognitions predict and explain eating behavior, whereas developmental models focus on how people form their food preferences. Cognitive models try to explain why people eat specific foods at a given moment. Many of these cognitive models of eating have borrowed from the health behavior change models we've already discussed, such as the health belief model or the theory of planned behavior. Overall, research suggests that people's attitudes, such as "I think eating a healthy meal is enjoyable," and their perceived control, such as "How confident am I that I can eat a healthy meal," predict their food choices. These models state that people's choices stem from their cognitions, which, as we know from previous videos, isn't always the case. You might have a positive attitude toward eating healthy, but when confronted with a tasty dessert, you throw your ideas about healthy eating out the window. Psychophysiological models focus on how hunger and satiety affect your food choices. By satiety, I mean a person's feeling that he or she is full, basically a motivation to stop eating. Similar to the cognitive models, these models try to predict people's current food choices. I'm not going to go into detail about this model because I think it's beyond the scope of this class. Basically, these models focus on biological pathways that affect our desire to eat or our desire to stop eating. Overall, researchers believe that the hypothalamus plays a large role in our eating behavior. Additionally, different neurotransmitters, such as norepinephrine, which can increase or decrease food intake depending upon which brain structures it's affecting, and serotonin, which decreases food intake, seem to affect eating behavior. Now, these models have been useful in studying individuals' food choices, but they all lack one important component. Specifically, they all lack a cultural component. If you want to know something about what a person likes to eat most, the best question you can ask them is what their culture or ethnic group is. Food choice is strongly based on culture and can override biological food preferences. Eating a chili pepper, for example, is a culturally defined activity, and it can't be explained with a biological account. Chili peppers cause physical pain, and liking chili peppers requires gradually increasing exposure to them. And even then, people who like chili peppers still feel the pain that eating them causes. They just come to like the burning sensation, possibly because it becomes associated with pleasant events in the individual's life. So, how do people decide how much food to eat? This question is really asking two things. One, what makes a person start and stop eating? And two, how much do people eat? We're going to look at 4 different factors that may influence when people start and stop eating. They're developmental factors, cognitive factors, environmental and situational factors, and individual differences. So just how much food do kids decide to eat? Well, as I previously mentioned, researchers have found that children are able to choose foods and consume amounts of food that are consistent with their growth and health. Now I just want to say a little more about that study. In the study, the researchers followed the eating patterns of children who were between the ages of 2 and 5. These children were observed closely to see how much food they ate for 6 days when given the opportunity to eat freely, without their parents or anyone else having any say in it. The adults chose what foods the kids could choose from, but they didn't give any input about how much of the food to eat. The study was done extremely carefully by giving the children their food in pre-weighed amounts and then weighing what was left over after the children had stopped eating. The researchers could tell exactly how much the children ate at each meal and across the whole day. What they found was that for each child, the amount of calories they ate at any given meal was highly variable. A child might eat 100 calories for breakfast one day and 400 calories for breakfast the next. This kind of eating tends to be pretty disturbing to parents because they worry that their child isn't getting enough food on one occasion or is getting too much food on another. However, when the researchers looked at how many calories each child ate in a given day, it was very stable. So, for example, if the child ate 1,200 calories in one day, then it was likely that the child would eat about 1,200 calories in the next day. This pattern occurred for every child in the study. The amount eaten per meal was highly variable, but the amount eaten per day was highly stable. This suggests that children, at least those under 5, can regulate their food intake on a daily basis. They eat a constant and reasonable amount of food each day. What about those children who are older than 5? Well, that's where other factors come into play, both for older children and for adults. On to cognitive factors. We're just going to discuss one major cognitive factor that has a large impact on eating: memory. In one study, researchers compared 4 subjects who had brain damage. 2 of them had very severe amnesia, such that they couldn't remember recent events at all. For example, the doctor could be with them for hours, step out of the room for a few minutes, and then when the doctor returned, the patient would have no memory of the doctor at all. However, these patients' IQs were fine. The other 2 patients had severe brain damage, but their memory was intact. Each patient was brought in a lunch at lunchtime. The lunch was placed in front of the patient, and the researcher said, "Here's lunch." The patient would then eat, and any time 1 full minute went by without the patient eating anything, the experimenter would ask, "Are you finished?" If the patient said yes, the tray of food was removed. The patients were instructed to have some water, then they were distracted with a conversation for 20 minutes. After that, another lunch tray was brought in and placed in front of the patient in the same way. Everyone was tested this way on several days, so there were several days when they were offered second lunches. The question was, do the patients with amnesia eat the second meal? First, let's talk about what the control patients did. These were the people with no memory problems. They were tested on 2 separate occasions, and on each occasion, they both ate their first meal completely. Then, when the experimenter came in with another meal, on both occasions, both patients rejected the second meal. These patients were both surprised and amused to be offered lunch again so soon after finishing their original lunch. But what did the amnesia patients do? Well, on all of the occasions they were tested, they both ate their first lunch. When the experimenter came in with their second lunch, on all of these occasions, both of them ate the second lunch too. Then, when the experimenter came in with a third lunch 20 minutes after their second lunch, both of the patients accepted it and ate it. These results suggest that memory for recent meals is an important indicator of when to start and when to stop eating a meal, and that, at least in these cases, memory is more important than physiological signals of hunger and satiety. If you recall eating one meal, you don't eat another. If you don't recall eating a meal, you go ahead and continue eating. Now we're going to talk about environmental and situational factors that affect our eating, which is an area that many psychologists have focused on since these factors can be easily manipulated and altered. We're going to focus on the work conducted by one researcher in particular, Brian Wansink. He's come up with some rather creative ways to test how our environments and our social situations affect how much food we eat. The first environmental factor we're going to discuss is how the size of plates, bowls, and dinnerware in general affects our eating. One way Wansink investigated this was to invent something called the bottomless soup bowl. Here's a video describing the study.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Wansink. Welcome to the Cornell University Food and Brand Lab. Here we do studies that show why people eat and what they can do to really easily make small changes to eat better. Today we're looking at soup. How do you know when you're full? In one study we did, we asked 150 Parisians, how do you know when your dinner is over? The typical person said, I would know that my dinner's over when I feel full. Okay, when I no longer feel hungry. Other people said, when food no longer tastes good. We asked 150 Chicagoans the same question. They said, I know that I would be through eating dinner when my Platter bowl was empty, when everybody else was through eating, or when the TV show I was watching was over. We're wondering what happens if your plate never does empty. That's what we're looking at today. We're doing an experiment called the bottomless soup bowl. It's a recreation of something we did a couple years ago, and we're going to see if things have changed. Okay. Now, one of the things that we're doing, we're going to be inviting people in a few minutes for a soup dinner. Now this looks like a normal table with normal soup bowls. If what happens today is the same stuff that happened in the past, we're going to find that the people sitting in this chair right here are going to end up eating about 73% more soup, about twice as much. So here's how the bottomless soup bowl study works. Right here, we have a big soup vat. Right here, we end up having a bowl that's attached to the soup vat through a piece of food-grade tubing that's fastened from the bottom of the bowl through a hole in the table, up to this. Take a look at this. If you see, that's attached, tubes attached to the bottom of the bowl. This tubing goes from underneath the bowl over to the big pot of soup, up through a hole in the table, and here we are. Until this person eats 6 quarts of soup, they will never be full because it's been gravity fed from this big vat into this little bowl. They could be here for 3 days, but until they eat 6 quarts of soup, they'll never see the bottom of that bowl. One of the things that this ends up showing is that we eat with our eyes and not with our stomach. We've done this with over 160 people, and what we find time and time again is that people get so caught up with talking with their friend or watching television or doing whatever they're doing that they will continue to eat until we stop them. And when they finish, they'll have eaten about 73% more than the person around on the other side of them. But if we say, "Are you full?" they'll say, "No, I mean, how can I be full? I still have a bowl of soup left." That's the problem with eating with our eyes. One real easy solution to avoid eating with our eyes is to make sure that at least at some point we dish out exactly what we think we're going to eat. And then we eat from that dish or that bowl. We don't eat out of a bottomless bag. We don't dish ice cream out of a bottomless ice cream container. But we dish it out, put it in our own plate or bowl, take that into the other room, sit down, and eat that. That's one of the best ways to avoid eating with our eyes, not with our stomach.
So this study evolved from observations concerning how people know when they're full. Wansink and his colleagues asked Parisians how they knew they were full. The Parisians tended to say they feel full when food no longer tastes good, which seems like a logical way to determine when to stop eating. But then the researchers asked how Americans knew when they were full. The majority of Americans said that they were full when their plate or bowl was empty, when everyone else was done eating, or when their TV show was over. So Parisians use internal cues to determine how much food to eat, whereas Americans appear to use external cues to determine how much to eat. On a side note, Wansink won an Ig Nobel Prize for the bottomless soup bowl study. The Ig Nobel Prize is a prize given out to researchers whose research first makes you laugh and then makes you think. Anyways, on to their method. As you saw in the video, there was a table with 2 bowls. Both were 18 ounces. At this table, one bowl is simply a normal bowl, but the other was bottomless. The bottomless bowl had tubing through it and was connected to a large 6-quart pot. As the participant ate, the soup level would slowly decrease, but as the participant took a break from eating, the level would slowly rise again. Out of the 160 participants, only 2 realized what was really going on with their refillable bowl of soup. Participants were given 20 minutes to eat their tomato soup, since chicken noodle soup clogged up the tubes, before the researchers stopped them to ask them some questions. They found that participants who got the bottomless bowl ate 73% more than people who got the regular bowl. And when researchers asked the participants if they were full, the participants responded, "No, I still have half a bowl of soup left." Clearly, these participants were using external cues to determine how full they were. If the experimenter hadn't stopped the study at 20 minutes, they probably would have continued eating. The size of your plate also matters. In another study, Wansink and his researchers told people that they could have a free meal, a pasta dish, if they just rated their food for taste. However, as you can guess, this wasn't the real goal of the study. Participants were told to serve themselves. After they served some pasta to themselves, the RA told the participant to go get some water, which was located on a different table. As the participant went to get their water, the RA was able to secretly weigh the food on the plate. Then, as the RA was giving the subject back their food, the RA would cough on it. The RA would exclaim how gross that was and apologize, and the RA would hand the participant another empty plate, telling them to re-serve themselves with some more food. This second plate was a larger plate. Again, the weight of the food was secretly measured. They found that people put 25% more food on the larger plate, and they weren't even aware that they did this. One participant even stated that she thought she put more food on the small plate as compared to the large plate, even though she did the exact opposite. Now, let's talk about bowl size and how it affects eating. So the researchers conducted another study in 2 phases. The first phase was a lecture, and the second phase was 6 weeks later at a Super Bowl party. In the first session, 60 graduate students attended a 90-minute lecture that was about mindless eating, and in particular, how many more calories people consume when eating out of larger containers. So by the end of the 90 minutes, you'd expect these graduate students to understand how large containers can affect their eating. In the second session, which was 6 weeks later, these graduate students came to a Super Bowl party. Half of the students got a gallon-sized snack bowl and were ushered into one room. The other half of the students got a half-gallon-sized snack bowl and were ushered into another room. These students were told to help themselves to the Chex Mix that the 2 bowls contained. As they filled out a few questionnaires, their bowls were secretly weighed. The researchers found that the students who were handed the gallon bowl ate 53% more food, which translates into 278 more calories, than the participants with the half-gallon bowl. Finally, the researchers asked the participants about their eating behavior at the end of the game. And the researchers already had data that the students with the larger bowl ate more, and when they asked these participants why they ate more, whether the shape of the bowl contributed to their eating, the participants said of course not. And instead, they gave excuses, such as, "I just didn't have a big lunch today." Apparently, these participants forgot about the lecture they had 6 weeks earlier. The results of this study show that even when we know about our susceptibility to external cues, we still fall prey to them. So being informed doesn't necessarily lead us to regulate our food consumption. Wansink has also found that food labels matter. Here's a video about some of Wansink's work in this area.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brian Wansink with the Smarter Lunchroom Movement. How do you get kids to take vegetables and eat them? It's very simple. We found that simply giving vegetables a name, calling carrots crunchy carrots, calling beans or broccoli, broccoli bites, made it seem like it was going to be more appealing and increased sales by 28%. What happens, people think it's going to taste different. When they taste it, they like it more, and it creates sort of a habit like that. Now, simply with carrots, in one school, with elementary school kids, we renamed carrots to be X-ray vision carrots. Sales shot up. Simply that suggestibility is enough to make kids think that food will be different, it'll taste different. And our taste buds are very suggestible. If we think it's going to be different, we taste something that's different, something we like. The easiest change you can make fruit visible and make vegetables, give them a name. Read more, learn more at smarterlunchrooms.org.
The study described in this video clearly shows that simply altering the name of a food can affect how much of that food we eat. In this study with elementary school students, the researchers gave carrots the name X-ray vision carrots. Simply changing the name of these carrots increased sales by 28%. This study on food labels shows that simply changing the name of foods is enough to get kids to think that the foods will taste different, and this leads them to try the foods and believe that the foods taste better. And if we think that foods taste better, then we're going to eat more of that food. Wansink and his colleagues have also looked at how changing the names of different menu items might affect adults' eating behavior. Again, this study was done in a cafeteria. Here are the two menus used in this study. So, red beans and rice versus traditional Cajun red beans and rice. Our chicken parmesan versus home-style chicken parmesan. Our zucchini cookies versus grandma's zucchini cookies. These were all the exact same items, just with different names. To not raise any suspicion, the researchers slowly rotated through the items. So, an item from menu A would be offered, and then 2 weeks later, the same item on menu B would be offered. And the results shouldn't be surprising. Menu B items were rated tastier, even though they were the exact same food. And items on menu B sold 27% more compared to their counterparts on menu A. So not only are we influenced by the size of our plates, but we're also influenced by the names of our food. In terms of health, this is great for getting kids to eat more vegetables, but these tactics can also be used by smart business owners. They know that calling a 2-day-old chocolate cake decadent Bavarian chocolate cake will increase sales. And sadly, our taste buds are probably not going to recognize the difference. In addition to the size of your dishware or the labels on your foods, numerous other factors can influence how much we eat. This video goes into some of these other factors.
On a recent weekday afternoon, CNN offered free chicken wings to anyone who wanted them, if they filled out a brief survey about food. What these folks didn't know is they were actually part of an informal experiment. Would people eat more if they couldn't see how much they'd already eaten? Helping us, Cornell professor Brian Wansink, author of Mindless Eating and a leading researcher on how people really behave around food.
How much free will do we have when it comes to our eating?
We believe we have all the free will in the world. We believe that if we overeat, it's because the food is really good or because we're really hungry. In reality, I think those are two of the last things that influence how much we eat.
We got the barbecue.
So we divided our chicken wing eaters into two groups. They didn't know it, but servers were clearing the plates for half the group and leaving the dirty plates for the other half, meaning one group can see exactly how many wings they've eaten. Folks in the other group have to rely on their memories and their stomachs.
So what are we doing here? What's going on?
One of the things we're looking at here is whether you eat with your eyes or you eat with your stomach.
So, which is it? Eyes or stomach? To find out, we visited Wansink at his food and brand lab at Cornell.
Here what we do is we study why people eat the things they eat. What we want to do is we want to capture what goes on in a normal, typical home. If your typical house had one-way mirrors, if it had cameras up on the walls, and if it had hidden scales underneath cloths and underneath tables, what we can do is get a very good idea on why we are so easily tricked into overeating without realizing it.
What he finds is jaw-dropping.
We are a nation of mindless eaters. Much of what we eat, and especially how much we eat, ends up being determined by what's around us. Two of the biggest influences on us end up being visibility and convenience. And there's nothing to stop us from reaching out, grabbing something, and eating something. We'll continue to do so till something tells us to stop.
Here's something to keep in mind. You'll eat more if you're eating family style, with more helpings an arm's length away. Or if you're eating from a large plate or bowl, or eating directly from the bag. You'll eat more if you're distracted, watching television, or talking to friends, or eating in the car.
We live with an embarrassment of food. I mean, almost any given time, we are just yards away from either a candy machine or a supermarket or someplace like that, or a refrigerator. And this is something that 75 years ago was unheard of.
In one experiment, Wansing placed candy jars of chocolate in office workers' cubicles for a month, then moved the candy 6 feet away. Suddenly, those same workers were eating fewer candies. That's right. Simply moving the candy 6 feet meant 5 fewer candies a day. That's 125 calories, 12 pounds a year.
If something is very visible, every time we see it, we have to make a decision. Do I want to eat that? Do I not want to eat that? Do I want that piece of candy on my desk? Do I not want to? And we can say no to it 27 times, but if it's visible, the 28th or 29th time, we might start saying maybe. And by time 30 or 31, we're saying, what the heck, I'm hungry.
In another study, people at the movies received free bags of popcorn. The moviegoers who received bigger bags ate more. And here's the kicker. All the popcorn was stale. Back at the restaurant,
We've marked a bowl for every person here. So every person has their own bowl of wing refuse assigned to them. So this is table 71. This is person number 1. That's how much they've eaten.
Oh my gosh.
We think these external cues, like the signals in your environment, have a tremendous impact in causing you to eat 200, 300, 400 more calories a day. And over the course of a year, this can be 20, 30, or 40 pounds extra than you'd otherwise not eat.
So for someone at home, if they wanted to take away a lesson here, what is something they could do to sort of remind themselves to eat less?
One thing is that you have to see it before you eat it. If you end up eating out of a big bag of chips or a big carton of ice cream, you can eat a lot before it looks like you've even made a dent, because you're going to be eating with your eyes and not with your stomach. Well, one easy thing to do is at least dish out what you want to eat before you start. How about you?
How many? Are you asking how many I had?
Get the most.
I lost track, and I know you guys are probably counting.
we were. And after an hour chowing down on wings, we weighed the results.
So what we're going to do is weigh these things, count the bones, we'll know how much the person ate.
In our experiment, those who had their plates cleared and couldn't see how much they'd eaten consumed 14% more chicken, after controlling for age, gender, and body mass index. In similar studies, Wansing found people ate twice as much.
Help yourself, take as many as you want.
And after eating all the wings they wanted in the middle of the afternoon, we tempted our guests one more time with cookies.
Oh my
Take a couple.
3/4, 3 out of 4 took the cookies.
And one for the road.
The video showed an informal study in which researchers kept track of how many chicken wings diners ate. Half of the participants could see how many wings they had left on their plates. The other half had their plates cleared, so they didn't have that visual cue for how much they were eating. They weighed the food after 1 hour of eating, which, if you think about it, is a pretty long time to be eating chicken wings. People who had their plates cleared consumed 14% more chicken compared to people who had their plates in front of them. And these results were after controlling for age, gender, and BMI. Visibility and convenience are the two best predictors of how much food we'll eat. In the video, we saw that one of Wansing's studies focused on available candy in an office setting. The candy dish was either on the worker's desk or it was 6 feet away. With the candy jar 6 feet away, people ate 5 fewer candies a day, which translated into 125 fewer calories a day, or 12 pounds a year. Wansing also conducted research in school cafeterias to study how visibility and convenience affect how much food kids eat. Through his research, he's formed the Smarter Lunchroom movement. Their goal is to identify low-cost solutions that don't impact revenue, but have a great impact on children's nutrition. So, through these small environmental changes, they're trying to significantly impact what kids eat at school. Well, they found that many small changes can lead to big effects. Here's a summary of his findings. If fruit is more visible and convenient, so in a pretty bowl instead of behind a sneeze shield, kids will eat more fruit. If the chocolate milk is harder to reach than the white milk, kids will take more white milk. If the salad bar is out of the way, people will eat less salad. But if you place the salad bar in front of the cashiers so that you have to walk around the salad bar to pay, kids will eat more salads. Even having a lid closed or open makes a difference. If an ice cream freezer lid is open, kids will take more ice cream than if the lid was closed. And finally, if you have to go through a separate cashier line to get chips and candy, then kids are less likely to buy chips and candy than when they're able to purchase everything in one line. So what do all these changes do? They all just adjust how visible and convenient different foods are. By making the chocolate milk just slightly harder to reach, more kids will take a white milk instead of a chocolate milk. And I love that simply closing the lid to an ice cream freezer decreases ice cream sales. That's probably the simplest intervention manipulation I've ever heard of, and it's effective. You also tend to eat more the more distracted you are, such as trying to eat while driving or hanging out with friends or while watching TV. Eating with one friend increases your food intake by 35%. Eating with 4 increases food intake by 75%, and eating with 7 or more friends increases food intake by 96%. Think about Thanksgiving or Super Bowl parties. So the more friends you have around you, the more distracted you are, and the more you eat. In one lab study, researchers looked at how much food people ate during an hour-long TV show compared to a 30-minute-long TV show. They provided everyone with 2 snacks, popcorn and carrots. They found that participants ate 28% more popcorn and 11% more carrots during the hour-long show compared to the half-hour-long show. So at least mindless eating isn't discriminatory. However, people don't eat more only when they're watching TV. They also eat more while reading the newspaper or a book. Now, before you start getting depressed thinking that the environment's out to get you, I just want to mention that Wayne Sink and crew have come up with some ways to prevent these environmental and situational factors from having as strong of an influence on you. This table is directly from the article you read for this lecture. You don't have to know any of these for the exam. I just wanted to remind you of things that you can do to eat smarter. Okay, we've been talking about all the factors that can influence our eating, but we've been assuming that everyone responds the same way to all these factors. Of course, this isn't the case. There's one individual difference that researchers have focused on when looking at food consumption differences. This is restrained eating, or people who are more commonly known as dieters. So first, a brief definition of restrained eaters. Restrained eaters are people who actively try to limit their caloric intake, aka dieters. First, I'm going to tell you about a study that really started researchers looking into the psychology of eating and this concept of restrained versus unrestrained eaters. This study led to dozens of studies on eating. Not only is this a classic study, but it was designed by an undergraduate student at Northwestern who was taking this undergrad psychology class. Her name was Debbie Mack. The study stemmed from something she observed in her sorority. She noticed that most of the women in her sorority were normal weight, but they were concerned about gaining weight. So they would diet during the day and spend a fair amount of time complaining about how fat they were. Then at night, somebody would get a box of donuts and nobody could resist them. And not just that, but after eating a donut, everyone would say, well, I guess I've blown my diet for today, and then eat more donuts, and then maybe some ice cream or some pizza. And they'd feel guilty and miserable and vow to start the diet over the next day. Well, Debbie Mack wondered if maybe it was the dieting during the day that was causing her sorority sisters to binge at night. So she told her psychology instructor, Peter Herman, that she wanted to do a study to see if dieting caused binge eating. Peter Herman was an obesity researcher, and he didn't think that dieting could possibly cause binge eating. He thought it was the other way around. people binged, and then they were worried about gaining weight, so they went on a diet. In her study, she asked her participants, who were all college undergraduates, if they were dieters, and then she divided the participants into a group of dieters and a group of non-dieters. When they arrived for the study, they were told that the study was a taste test. Half of the subjects were given 2 milkshakes, a chocolate one and a vanilla one, and were told that they had to drink both shakes and then rate them on questionnaire forms. They were also told that while they consumed these drinks, they should be rating them on various scales such as creaminess, sweetness, coldness, and other dimensions that are important for milkshakes. The other half of the subjects didn't have to rate any milkshakes. So the subjects have either drunk 2 milkshakes or they haven't drank any milkshakes. Then they moved on to the second part of the study, which was the ice cream taste test. In this part of the study, 3 pints of ice cream were placed in front of the subjects, 1 chocolate, 1 vanilla, and 1 strawberry. The subject was left alone in a room with the ice cream, along with rating scales for each flavor, and was told to taste as much of each flavor as she needed to give accurate ratings for each flavor. The subject was left with the ice cream alone for 10 minutes. When the 10 minutes were up, the study was over. Once the subject left, the experimenter weighed the containers of ice cream. So the subject thinks that the experimenter is interested in her ratings of ice cream, but really the experimenter is interested in how much ice cream the subject ate. So what did the researchers find? Well, first, let's look at the women who weren't on a diet. If they didn't have any milkshake preload, then they ate a lot of ice cream. But if they did have a milkshake preload, they didn't eat very much ice cream. So intuitively, this makes sense. When they're hungry, they eat. And when they've already eaten, they eat less. But that's just what unrestrained eaters do. What about restrained eaters? So you can see that dieters who didn't have any milkshakes ate very little ice cream. However, look at the dieters, the restrained eaters, who had to drink 2 milkshakes. They consumed a lot more ice cream. By drinking the milkshakes, their diet was ruined, so they decided in their heads that they may as well enjoy themselves and eat a lot more ice cream. Now, this study made a lot of important contributions. First of all, it suggests that dieters create a certain boundary in their mind about how much food they can eat in a day. Once they cross that boundary, it's over. They can eat as much as they want. To diet, you have to ignore the signals your body gives you to tell you when to start and stop eating, signals of hunger and fullness. Dieters tend to ignore these signals and tend to focus on their own rules about calories and fat content. Non-dieters don't have these self-imposed boundaries. Their eating is more likely to be regulated by how hungry you are. And when your eating is regulated by hunger, you never end up binge eating because you stop eating when you're full. And that's why in the world of eating disorders, healthy eating is defined as eating in response to hunger. Lots of people think healthy eating is defined as eating a certain proportion of fats, proteins, and carbohydrates, but that's not how healthy eating is really defined. So one thing that came from this study is an understanding that dieters regulate their eating behavior differently than non-dieters, and the possibility that dieting might actually lead to binge eating rather than the other way around. Secondly, this study was the first to recognize that dieters were an important group of people for psychologists to study. And finally, this study invented a whole new methodology for studying eating. The technique invented in this study, the milkshake followed by ice cream taste test, has been used in hundreds of other studies of dieting and eating regulation. A variation of this study was done in which dieters and non-dieters participated in the same paradigm. But in this case, the subjects were told that the milkshakes were either high fat or low fat, even though all of the milkshakes were high fat. So you already know what happens if the milkshakes are labeled high fat. Dieters cross their boundary, say forget it, and then eat lots of ice cream during the taste test. However, if they think the milkshake was low fat, they behaved a lot differently. Restrained participants who thought they had just had a low-fat milkshake didn't consume much ice cream during the taste test. They behaved as if they didn't have any preload at all. In other words, they behaved as if they hadn't yet blown their diet. In another study, researchers looked at restrained and unrestrained eaters, but in this sample, all of the subjects were male. Participants were in one of four conditions: true high-calorie preload, true low-calorie preload, fake high-calorie preload, and fake low-calorie preload. The preload in this study was 2 4-ounce cups of chocolate pudding instead of a milkshake. After the preload, they did the taste test, which consisted of 20 roast beef sandwich quarters and 20 cheese sandwich quarters, and they were left alone for 15 minutes with their sandwiches. The researchers found that what mattered most was the perception of high calories and not the total number of actual calories. Unrestrained eaters ate the same in all four conditions, so caloric levels in the preload didn't affect the amount consumed during the taste test. But of course, restrained eaters showed a different pattern. Restrained eaters ate more during the taste test if they thought they'd consumed a high-calorie preload. And this didn't matter if the pudding was actually high-calorie or actually low-calorie. Restrained eaters ate less during the taste test if they thought the pudding was low-calorie, whether or not it was truly low-calorie. All these studies on dieters show that when restrained eaters simply believe that they had a high-calorie preload, then they end up overindulging during a taste test. And the flip side also happens. If they actually have a high-calorie preload, but they're told that it's a non-fat or low-calorie preload, dieters don't eat a lot during the taste test. So beliefs, or dieters' cognitions, affect how much they eat. What else might make people overindulge? Emotional factors are also central to eating behaviors. Dieters tend to eat more when they're stressed or depressed. Non-dieters tend to eat the same amount or less when they're stressed. Lots of studies have been done to stress out and induce bad moods in dieters and see how much they eat. For example, they have been stressed out with the threat of shock, the anticipation of public speaking, or expecting blood samples to be taken. They've been induced with bad moods by watching unpleasant videos, enduring interpersonal rejection, and failing at a task. In all these studies, the researchers find that dieters overeat after going through these bad mood or stress-inducing tasks. Why did dieters overeat in reaction to negative moods? The most popular explanation right now is that negative moods basically distract restrained eaters. Being in a negative mood is distracting, so dieters no longer have the cognitive resources to pay attention to what and how much they're eating, which leads to overeating. Okay, the following slides are just for your notes, and just to help you summarize these findings on restricted and non-restricted dieting. Feel free to pause the video on these slides to just go over these summaries. Moving on to the study of the psychological effects of hunger and semi-starvation. The first way people looked at the psychological effects of hunger and starvation was by studying naturally occurring cases of starvation. Unfortunately, there are a lot of these kinds of cases. For example, starvation occurs during famines, at times of economic strife, during times of war, so prisoners of war in prison camps or concentration camps, etc. Cases of starvation also come from shipwrecks or plane crashes in isolated locations, and some well-documented cases of starvation come from stories of explorers, especially among polar explorers. Explorers tend to keep diaries and journals about their experiences. Oftentimes, when the explorer dies, a journal is found documenting their situations up until shortly before their death. So lots of interesting information comes from these stories. These accounts all find similar psychological effects of hunger. First, people get incredibly irritated, grouchy, and unreasonable. There's lots of fighting and arguing over the best way to handle and share the little bit of food that's still available. As people get hungrier, they get weaker and weaker, and apathy sets in. Hunger pains are problems, and the people tend to go to bizarre lengths to keep their stomachs full to avoid these hunger pains. One account reports that one explorer even ate his boots and then his pants to keep his hunger pains at bay. This man, who was searching for the Northwest Passage, lived to tell his story, but others in his expedition didn't. From the remains of the men on his expedition, it was clear that they had cannibalized each other, even though all of the survivors denied this. In the later stages of starvation, hunger pains go away. There are lots of accounts of visual hallucinations. The striking thing about all the accounts is that people become obsessed with food. They spend all their time talking about it, thinking about it, daydreaming about food, and remembering their favorite food items from their past. They have a difficult time focusing on anything other than food. Now, there's only so much we can learn about the effects of starvation from cases like these. In these instances, you can't separate the effects of hunger from the effects of being forced to do heavy physical labor, being lost at sea, being afraid, being at war, having no heat, or fearing for your family's safety. It was said that back when all psychologists had to go on were these natural cases of starvation, that the psychology of hunger couldn't be distinguished from the psychology of fear. One researcher came along and decided that he wanted to study what the true effects of starvation were, separated from other fears that often accompany a war-torn or famine-plagued state. He wanted to study starvation in its pure form, so he designed a truly remarkable study. He conducted his study during the end of World War II. He recruited men who were conscientious objectors to the war. He brought 36 of these men to the campus of the University of Minnesota and then starved them. Just so you know, they were under very comfortable conditions otherwise. He had a control period, which was 3 months long, during which he watched the men closely, had them fill out dozens of questionnaires, gave them several psychiatric interviews, gave them physical tests of endurance and ability, and so on. He measured hundreds of things. Then he put them on a starvation diet for 6 months and continually monitored everything about them. The men also were required to keep diaries throughout the entire study. At the end of the 6 months, the men were put on a rehabilitation diet for 3 months, during which time they could eat whatever they wanted. So what happened? Well, first of all, they lost a lot of weight. They lost on average 25% of their body weight. This is a massive amount of weight. Secondly, after the diet ended, the weight was gained back faster than it was lost, and the subjects ended up heavier than they were when they started. And they gained fat back faster than other kinds of weight, and this fat stayed with them for a long time. Also, their metabolism slowed way down and stayed slowed down for a very long time. Here are some images of what these participants looked like when they lost all their weight, and also what they started to look like again as they gained some of their weight back. So as you can see, these participants became very, very thin. Unsurprisingly, during the 6-month starvation period, these participants became obsessed with food. Several of the men vowed to take up new jobs in the food industry, either opening a grocery store or a restaurant, becoming a chef, or working on a farm. More than 2/3 of these men started clipping recipes during the course of the study, even though they'd never cooked before. Over half of the men started reading cookbooks. They spent all of their time thinking about food. They also started developing weird rituals around eating. They would take forever to eat. They would play with their food, lick their dishes, add enormous amount of spices to their foods. They would mix their foods up into strange concoctions that most people would find disgusting. And they wouldn't speak to anyone during their meals. They just remained completely focused on their food. These men also got very weak and tired, and very irritable. All of the men got along very well during the control period, but during the starvation period, they became very irritable toward each other. They lost self-control and felt anxious and nervous. They became very self-centered. Later, apathy set in. The men stopped grooming themselves or engaging in social activities. They stopped going to classes or reading or doing anything. They just wanted to lie around in their bed. Unlike the natural starvation cases, these men felt hunger pains every day. In addition, the men became very depressed. The researcher didn't measure it exactly this way, but it looks like nearly all the subjects would have qualified for a diagnosis of clinical depression. And unfortunately, 6 of the 36 subjects had very extreme psychotic reactions. One of them lost all hold on reality and checked himself into a mental institution. And one guy, in his desperation to be removed from the study, he didn't just want to quit, chopped 3 fingers off of his hand with an axe. And in a sign that this was a very unethical study, when he was hospitalized for the incident, he was still kept on the starvation diet. Obviously, this study was pre-IRB. After the starvation period ended, it took quite a long time for the men to return to normal. The depression and irritability stayed with them for almost a year, as did the hunger pains. When the rehabilitation eating period ended and the men were allowed to eat whatever they wanted, most of them gorged on food, eating up to 11,000 calories a day. And these poor guys still reported feeling hungry, despite not being able to physically eat another bite. They reported feeling no control over their eating anymore. In general, for most aspects of their personality and mood, it took them almost an entire year to return to how they felt before the study. One final point about the study: during the control period, the men were given 3,900 calories a day, and during the starvation period, they were given 1,570 calories a day. This was 40% of their normal diet. So really, the study may call itself a starvation study, but truly, it was the very first diet study. Isn't that crazy? Many people today try to go on diets by limiting their calorie intake to 1,500 calories or less. These participants consumed 1,570 calories. So it's no wonder people get super cranky when they're dieting.